the one desire you need to reach Nibbana, according to Buddha. Most of the Buddha's descriptions of dependent co-arising end with the suffering of aging, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, despair. But there's one that goes beyond that. From suffering, it says there's conviction. In other words, conviction in the Buddha's teachings that there is a way out. Then, based on that conviction, you practice until you gain a sense of joy. The joy becomes the basis for concentration, then discernment, then release. So that version of dependent co-arising ends positively, with suffering leading you ultimately to follow the path that gets you to something that's not dependent, something independent, which is total release. It's interesting to think about how that connection between suffering and conviction comes about. Remember, in suffering, there's clinging and craving. We usually think of craving as being bad because it causes suffering. Yet there's a part of the definition of suffering, or the explanation of what suffering means, which includes desire. But it's actually a skillful desire, one that the Buddha has you cultivate. It's in the phrase, not getting what you want. It sounds pretty ordinary. There are so many things in life where we want something, we don't get it, and then we're unhappy. But the Buddha is not talking about that general, generic kind of suffering. He's talking about something deeper. That those who are subject to birth don't want to be subject to birth. But he says, this is not to be gained simply by wishing, and so on. If you're subject to aging, you don't want to age, but that's not to be gained by wishing. You don't want to die, but freedom from death is not to be gained by wishing. Down through sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, despair. In each case, if you're subject to these things, you can't simply wish your way out of them. But the Buddha doesn't discourage you. He doesn't say, well, just give up all desire. Give up hope. Don't want things to be different from the way they are. Look at him. As a young man, he examined his life and realized he didn't want to age, grow ill, die. He wanted to gain freedom from these things. As he searched, he finally found that there was a path of practice that could get you beyond aging, illness, and death. So the desire to go beyond aging, illness, and death is not to be discouraged. You're wanting things to be different from the way they are, but you realize that simply wanting is not going to be enough. You actually have to follow the path. That's what conviction is all about. You're convinced that this is a good path. The desire in the suffering itself is what compels you to practice. As Ajahn Fuang used to like to say, nobody's hired us to practice. Nobody's forced us to practice. We're practicing of our own free will. And while it's true that nobody has forced us to practice, the simple fact of suffering and the fact that we don't want to suffer is what pushes us. The Buddha talks about this kind of desire in a positive way in many places. There's a passage where he talks about household distress. When you don't get the sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, and ideas you want. He says to replace that with what he calls renunciate distress. When you think about the fact that there are people who have gained awakening, but you're not there yet, That sense of distress should compel you to practice. From renunciate distress, then you go to renunciate joy. When you begin to gain insight into things that have burdened the mind, and you see that you're now free from those things. So the distress there is actually useful. It's to be encouraged, but you don't just sit with the distress. You act on it through your conviction that there is a way out. Similarly, with the issue of desire as one of the bases for success. You probably know the story. When Ananda is staying in a park, a Brahmin comes to visit him and asks him, "This path you're practicing, what's the goal?" And Ananda says, "One of the goals is to put an end to desire." "What kind of path do you follow to the end of desire?" Ananda describes the 4 bases for success. Concentration based on desire, concentration based on persistence, concentration based on intent, concentration based on analysis. The Brahmin says, then it's an endless path. How can you use desire to get rid of desire? Ananda asks him a question in return. He says, "You came to this park. Before you came here, did you have the desire to come here?" "Well, yes." "How about now that you've arrived?" "The desire is gone because I'm already here." Ananda says, "It's the same with the path. You use desire to get yourself to a place where you don't need to desire anything anymore." Again, you don't do that simply by wishing. You think in terms of cause and effect. You follow the path. In this case, it's the path of concentration plus right effort, and by implication, all of the other factors of the path. When the Buddha talks about the various wings to awakening, the question always comes up, how do you develop them? The answer always comes down to following the Noble Eightfold Path. So look at your practice. The path comes down to training in heightened virtue, heightened concentration, heightened discernment. Which aspect are you missing? In which aspect are you weak? Virtue is there to make you honest and more sensitive to your mind as you go through the day. We talk about being mindful of mind states as if it were happening as something in the abstract that you just observe without getting involved. But it's actually happening as you're making choices as you go through the day about what you're going to do. What kind of choices are you making? What kind of intentions are you acting on? This is not just a matter of watching things coming and going, but noticing which intentions in the mind are skillful and which ones are not. If there's an unskillful intention, how do you say no to it in an effective way? This kind of knowledge the Buddha calls penetrative. He talks about how discernment sees arising and passing away in a penetrative way. But what does that mean? To see it penetratively. It's not just watching the fact of arising and passing away. It's noticing that when some things arise, you should want them to continue because they are skillful. They have good effects. When other things arise, you should want to put an end to them because they don't. You're making value judgments. So you're thinking not simply about things arising and passing away, but also about where are they leading you? What kind of actions will they inspire in you? Bringing the practice of the precepts into your daily life makes you sensitive to that aspect of what's going on in your mind. It also prepares you for concentration because it gives you practice in looking at your intentions. So now that you're going to practice concentration, you're going to focus on one intention. You're going to keep with the breath here in the present moment. And for the time being, you're going to preoccupy yourself with nothing but the breath. We know that concentration is not the end of the path. It's not the goal. But you really want to focus on it because it is the path. And you want to give all your energy to the path. There's a Zen teacher, Dogen, who made the comment one time that the development of the path is basically the same thing as the realization of the end of suffering. What he meant was that you don't sit here going through the motions of the path with your mind down at the end of the path, saying, "When is that gonna come?" You focus here on what you're doing, getting really involved in the breath. As you focus here, the end of the path will appear right here. As the Buddha said, you leap up or you leap into the breath. You grow confident, steadfast, and your mind gets released into its perception of just being with breath. The whole body. Think of every sensation you have in the body as being related to the breath somehow. Make a survey through the body. When you breathe in, where do you feel it inside? When you breathe out, where do you feel it? Is there a boundary around the breath? Well, no. How far can you gain a sense of how the breath relates to the different organs of the body, the different parts of the body, out through the skin, out beyond the skin? Really immerse yourself in the perception of the breath. If there are any tight spots in the body, don't think of them as being solid. Think of them simply as blocked breath, stagnant breath. And if breath is stagnant, what do? You open up all the channels around it so that it can flow. In other words, you relate to your sense of the body as you feel it from within, totally in breath terms. Try to gain a sense of oneness with the breath, your awareness in the breath, and the sense of well-being filling the whole body. As you do this, you begin to notice how you're putting this together. The way you breathe, the way you talk to yourself, the images you hold in mind. All of these things are called sankhara, fabrication. They're things you put together. The Buddha wants you to get really good at this, because the path as a whole is the best fabricated thing there is in the world. As you put it together, you begin to gain some insight into how you not only put this together, but how you also put all your other emotional states, mental states together using these three things: the way you breathe, the way you talk to yourself, and the images you hold in mind, the feelings you focus on. This is how training in heightened concentration gets you to training in heightened discernment. Because fabrication, when you look at dependent co-arising, is right next to ignorance. The implication being that if you fabricate your experience with any of these means, breathing, your inner conversation, and your perceptions, you're going to suffer. But if you do it with knowledge, it can become the path to the end of suffering. You're developing new skills. The word for ignorance, avidya, means not only not knowing, but also lack of skill. The discernment that comes with mastering these skills is what enables you to see these things for yourself. You're not just cutting out the Buddha's brilliant ideas and concepts and pasting them on your mind or on your experience, you're actually learning about what's going on in your mind and your body by developing skillful mental states and skillful physical states with the breath. It's in this way that you complete the path, composed of the 8 factors that boil down to virtue, concentration, discernment, to the point where you can let go of everything else that's not on the path. Then finally, you let go of the path itself because it encourages you to do so. Right view encourages you to look at things as fabrication so that you can see where they're not worth engaging in. You see where their appeal is, where their allure is, but also where their drawbacks are, to the point where you discover, okay, that's not worth it. A value judgment. When you've cleared away your other attachments, then you turn around to this attachment, to right view itself. You take this apart because it tells you to. It basically refers back to itself. This too is fabricated, so take it apart. Take it apart. Take apart your desire and passion for it, and then you'll be freed. That's the point where the Buddha tells you to totally let go of desire and passion. But up to that point, you use it. The desire to find what is free from aging, illness, and death. It's what's been motivating you all along, like the Brahmin walking to the park. When you get there, you can put the desire down, like the Brahman who's arrived. So have a clear sense of which of your desires are part of the problem and which of your desires are part of the solution. The desires that are willing to put in the effort to master the path are the ones you want to encourage. The desire to simply sit around thinking, I want this, I want that, without really doing what needs to be done. Even with worldly things, that doesn't work. And of course, it's not going to work with the Dhamma. You can't play the reverse of Barney the dinosaur saying, well, if I don't want something strong enough, then it'll come. You learn how to cultivate skillful desires and then apply them in a skillful way. So those desires there in suffering can actually be cultivated wisely. The desires not to age, not to grow ill, not to die, actually become part of the path. The motivation behind right effort, the motivation behind right resolve. As you apply them to the path, you find the happiness of actually getting what you want. The desire for awakening. When the Buddha lists the various forms of suffering under the first noble truth, one of them is not getting what is wanted. If you read just that much, and you remember that the Buddha also said that craving is the cause of suffering, you might think that the cure for that form of suffering is simply not to want anything. When you don't want anything, you won't be disappointed when you don't get anything. You won't suffer. It's from this line of reasoning that people have drawn the conclusion that if the key to the goal of not suffering is not to want anything, then the path there should also involve not wanting anything either. From that, it follows that a path of not wanting would have to be a path of not doing, and to be truly not doing anything, You can't assume that you're doing the path, or that there's even anyone there to do the path to begin with. The path simply unfolds as you get yourself out of the way. But if you read the Buddha's explanation of what he means by not getting what is wanted, and if you view that explanation in light of his own quest for awakening, you realize that the path to ending that form of suffering is more subtle and strategic. It involves wanting and doing, and you have to take responsibility for making sure it gets done. He explains not getting what is wanted like this, and what is the stress of not getting what is wanted. In being subject to birth, the wish arises, "Oh, may we not be subject to birth, and may birth not come to us." But this is not to be achieved by wishing. This is the stress of not getting what is wanted. In being subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair, the wish arises, "Oh, may we not be subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair, and may aging, illness, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair not come to us." But this is not to be achieved by wishing. This is the stress of not getting what is wanted. This explanation complicates the picture because the desire not to be subject to birth, aging, illness, death, and all the rest was precisely the desire that motivated the Bodhisattva, the Buddha, to be in his search for awakening. I too, monks, before my self-awakening, when I was still just an unawakened Bodhisattva, the thought occurred to me, why do I, being subject myself to birth, seek what is likewise subject to birth? Being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, why do I seek what is likewise subject to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement? What if I, being subject myself to birth, seeing the drawbacks of birth, were to seek the unborn, unexhaled rest from the yoke, unbinding? What if I, being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, seeing the drawbacks of aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, were to seek the agingless, illnessless, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding? The desire that motivated him to search for awakening differed from the more generic desire to put an end to aging, etc., in that he recognized that the ending of the more everyday forms of not getting what you want, such as freedom from sorrow, lamentation, and despair, required something radical, total freedom from birth and death. That in turn would require a dedicated search. He called that search the noble search, in contrast to the ignoble search that looked for happiness in things subject to birth, aging, illness, and death, such as relationships and possessions. Now, it wasn't the case that his desire to go beyond birth, etc., was limited to just the beginning of his path. His continued desire to find the deathless explains why he wasn't satisfied with the first two knowledges on the night of his awakening. Knowing his previous lives and knowing how beings throughout the cosmos die and are reborn in line with their actions. Only when he found the deathless through the third knowledge, knowing that he had mastered the duties of the Four Noble Truths, did he end his search. Then, monks, being subject myself to birth, seeing the drawbacks of birth, seeking the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding, I reached the unborn, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding. being subject myself to aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, seeing the drawbacks of aging, illness, death, sorrow, defilement, seeking the agingless, illnessless, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding. I reach the agingless, illnessless, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled, unexcelled rest from the yoke, unbinding. Knowledge and vision arose in me. Unprovoked is my release. This is the last birth. There is now no further becoming. He then taught his students to give rise to the same desire for the deathless, and rather than simply wishing for the deathless or abandoning that desire and resting content with things subject to death, to focus their desires on the path to the deathless and to follow through with it until they had reached the goal. This is why the Buddha noted that one of the secrets to his awakening was discontent with skillful qualities. As he described his quest for awakening, when he followed a path of practice and found that it didn't lead all the way to the deathless, he abandoned it in search of what is skillful. He kept trying to raise the level of his skill until it yielded the results he wanted. Only when he reached the deathless was he content. He illustrated this principle with an analogy. If a person has need of the heartwood of a tree, he shouldn't content himself with the leaves and twigs, the bark, or the sapwood. He has to keep searching until he finds the heartwood that will serve his purposes. So the desire for the deathless is not the problem. The problem is in wanting to attain the deathless simply through wishing it to be so. This is why the Buddha taught that the duty with regard to suffering is not to abandon the desire for the deathless, but to comprehend it. When you comprehend the problem, you'll comprehend the solution, and you can focus your desires there. The Buddha makes this point in more abstract terms in an interesting variant on dependent co-arising. His list of the causes that lead to suffering and stress. Most versions of the list end with suffering, but one version takes suffering as the jumping-off point for a series of factors beginning with conviction. When you comprehend the suffering of not getting what you want and can actually pinpoint the problem, that's your motivation for placing conviction in the Buddha's path and desiring to follow it. When you do, you give rise to joy, to the rapture, pleasure, and calm of concentration, and to the discernment that inspires dispassion, leading to total release. When you focus your desires on following the right path of action, you'll get what you want. When? Ananda used an analogy to illustrate the role of desire on the path and in attaining the goal. Once, when he was staying in a park, a Brahmin came and asked him what the goal of his practice was. Ananda replied that the goal was to abandon desire. The Brahmin then asked whether there was a path of practice leading to the abandoning of desire, and Ananda replied that there was. He then described the path in terms of a teaching called the 4 bases of power. Mental power endowed with concentration based on one of 4 things: desire, persistence, intent, and analysis, along with the fabrications of exertion or right effort. The Brahman then replied that the path would have to be an endless path, because there's no way you could abandon desire by means of desire. Ananda responded with his analogy. Before the Brahman came to the park, didn't he have a desire to come? didn't he make an effort to act on that desire? And when he arrived, wasn't that desire, along with the effort, allayed? The Brahmin admitted that that was the case. In the same way, Ananda continued, when a person has attained total awakening, whatever desire he or she had for awakening, whatever effort he or she made for awakening, is allayed. What he implies here is that you need desire to get on the path and stick with it to the end. And as he also implies, it's not the case that in the higher stages of the path, you attain the goal by abandoning the desire to get there. You abandon the desire because you've arrived. Now, the path and the goal are two different things. The goal is unfabricated, which means that it doesn't depend on any conditions. It's not something you do. The path, though, is fabricated. It doesn't cause the unfabricated, but the act of following the path can take you there, and it is a path of doing. The important thing is that you do it right. You can't clone awakening by abandoning all efforts in imitation of what you've read about the goal. We can illustrate this point with another of the Buddha's analogies. Suppose you want milk from a cow. If you try to get it by twisting the cow's horn, you won't get any milk no matter how much you want it. But if you pull the udder, you'll get the milk. All too many people try getting milk by twisting the horn, and then, when they don't get any, they stop twisting the horn. They notice that not twisting the horn is more peaceful than twisting it. So they decide that peace is to be found, not by doing anything to the cow, but by embracing your innate cow awareness. They even suggest that that's what the Buddha meant by milk. Now cow awareness may bring you peace and relief after years of twisting the horn, but it still leaves you thirsty, because it's no way to get any milk. It would be a shame to content yourself with being thirsty, because the milk is still potentially available. What you have to realize is that you originally took the wrong approach, and that you'll have to make the effort to find the right approach. Even though the act of pulling the udder is very different from the act of drinking milk, and it's not as peaceful as simply being aware of the cow. Still, when you pull the udder, you'll get the milk. You can end your thirst. That's why it's the right approach. As the Buddha says in that sutta, the right approach to awakening is the Noble Eightfold Path. And as he states in a famous verse from the Dhammapada, it's up to you to follow the path. Just this is the path. There is no other. To purify vision. Follow it, and that will be Mara's bewilderment. It's for you to strive ardently. Tathagata simply point out the way. Those who practice, absorbed in jhana, from Mara's bonds they'll be freed. Here, the Buddha's not simply taking poetic license in saying that it's for you to strive. Again and again, throughout the canon, when he describes how you should talk to yourself as you take on different aspects of the path, he advises you to use your sense of I to emphasize the fact that you're making the choice to practice properly, and you're going to have to accept responsibility for carrying through with that choice. Even though you'll eventually need to abandon the sense of I am as you approach the final stages of the path, just as you'll have to abandon desire and striving. You won't arrive at those final stages unless you first put that I am to good use all along the way. Only then, when the time comes, can you abandon it in a way that's healthy and effective. The Buddha himself, when describing his quest for awakening, said again and again in effect, that I did this. Quite secluded from sensuality, secluded from unskillful qualities, I entered and remained in the first jhana. With the abandoning of pleasure and pain, I entered and remained in the fourth jhana. When the mind was thus concentrated, I directed it to the knowledge of the ending of the mental effluence. A prime example of how he taught the skillful use of I to others is found in his instructions to his son, Rahula. When Rahula was still a young boy, the Buddha tells him to reflect on his actions before doing them, while doing them, and after they're done, to make sure that he doesn't intend any harm and that his actions actually succeed in avoiding harm. In each case, the reflection involves taking responsibility for his actions. This action I want to do. This action I am doing. This action I have done. Only when Rahula takes responsibility for his actions in this way can he purify them. This, the Buddha says, is how all those in the past, present, and future who purify their actions have acted, are acting, and will act. And this skillful use of I applies not only on the beginning levels of the practice, but also on more advanced stages. Here, for instance, is how the Buddha recommends making mindfulness the governing principle with regard to developing discernment and releasing the mind. And how is mindfulness the governing principle? The mindfulness that I will scrutinize with discernment any Dhamma that is not yet scrutinized, or I will protect with discernment any Dhamma that has been scrutinized, is well established right within. The mindfulness that I will touch through release any Dhamma that is not yet touched, or I will protect with discernment any Dhamma that has been touched, is well established right within. This is how mindfulness is the governing principle. This is how he recommended that Ananda aim at attaining the highest form of emptiness. Therefore, Ananda, you should train yourselves. We will enter and remain in the emptiness that is pure, superior, and unsurpassed. I, we. These terms have their skillful uses. They remind you that you have to take responsibility for the path. No one else and nothing else can do it for you. If you try to throw away all notions of desire, striving, and your role in doing the path won't get done. Only when it's done can you safely put these notions aside. You may have heard of the simile of the raft. To get to the further shore, you use twigs, branches, and vines you find on the shore to put together a raft. This stands for the fact that the raft has to be made of things like desire and your sense of I found in the unawakened mind, and you have to put them together skillfully. You can't just dump them in the river and hope that they'll carry you across. Once you've made the raft, then, holding on to it and making an effort with your hands and feet, you swim over to the other shore. At that point, you can put the raft down and go on your way. But you don't put it down until it's done its job, and you do put it down with a sense of appreciation. How useful this raft has been to me. For it was in dependence on this raft that, making an effort with my hands and feet, I have crossed over to safety on the further shore. In the same way, you don't put aside your desire for awakening or your sense of yourself as responsible for the path until the path has done its job. And when you put them down skillfully, you'll do it with an appreciative sense of the good they have done.